Infrastructure is crumbling and the problems are only getting worse. The pressure to find solutions is hot. Let's talk about why American cities have no water, no electricity, and no money to fix their infrastructure problems. Welcome to the Infrastructure Hot Seat Podcast, hosted by Chad Smeltzer.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Hot Seat, Episode 8, where our guest is Ted Bennett, who works with Jones & Henry engineering firm out of Ohio. Ted's vast experience has been over 15 years as a city engineer and working as a director of operations. And he manages infrastructure projects on site, building wastewater treatment plants, water plants. He has a YouTube channel called The Aquifer. Everyone should go check that out. This podcast, though, we talk about how engineering firms need to diversify their business models from an hourly rate to replace the technologies that are making them more efficient. So it's going to reduce their hourly rates, as well as how engineering firms, some are good, some are bad. Like, let's talk about it and see what those problems are and why some engineering firms just aren't up to par with some of the bigger firms that are out there. So I hope you enjoy it. Have a great day. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Hot Seat. My name is Chad Smeltzer. I am your host. Today we have a guest who is a experienced engineer. Going through his history, he has worked in a couple different engineering firms, been assistant engineer, civil engineer, who is now the chief financial officer at Jones & Henry Engineers, director of infrastructure engineering, Mr. Ted Bennett. Thank you for joining me, Ted Bennett.
Thank you, Chad. I'm excited to talk a little bit about water and sewer and engineering related to what we do in this business with water and sewer.
For sure, it's no doubt that we have a aging infrastructure, right? But the sewer systems are very old that we deal with, and we're looking to find solutions and experienced engineers like yourself to help us solve some of these infrastructure problems that we have. Mm-hmm. Now, starting off, you have a YouTube channel. You also write content, blogs, things like that. Can you give me a little insight to what you do with some of your content?
Mm-hmm. For me, Chad, the big thing is, just to be creative, and those avenues give me an outlet for, inspiration of things that I think of that I think that might be helpful for others, trying to come up in this business. I wish sometimes that there was things like that for me to learn about when I was, a youngster, learning about engineering.
Speaking of being a youngster, and I know this is something we talked about before, but, let's talk about how you got into engineering. I know your family has a history of engineers, and, sounds like that's how you got started. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure thing. My dad was a civil engineer for 40 years, and I thought everyone's dad was a civil engineer growing up. It just seemed like what everybody did. Everyone we knew were engineers, and I helped out a lot in the younger years of holding the rod on survey jobs and that sort of thing. So I was exposed to this from the very, very beginning. Yeah,
so you grew up in the infrastructure world, so to speak, and why do you love it now?
I think it's something that it's very tangible. What you do, you can see the results of your work, and you can recognize the things you do make a difference in the community that you live in. You're working oftentimes, sometimes on the street you live on, so it makes it real.
Yeah. No, that's true. It does. So why do you, and I guess my question would be is, why do you want to help people fix infrastructure? It's kind of a different way to ask you why you love it, but I think we can dig into that a little bit more, because people have, I have a passion to, bring light the infrastructure problems and procurement, and I'd love to know a little bit more about why do you feel the need to, build things?
I think that the big thing is you always want to leave the world in a little bit better place than where you picked up with it. So it's something like sort of like a personal mission to know that you've made a difference with what you've done, with your time in this industry, and kind of pass on what you know to the next people is sort of part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. What challenges did your dad have you doing when you were a young age? Like what things did he have you doing that you probably didn't like?
Oh gosh, he was so hard on me with math homework. He would not only would your math have to be correct, it needed to be legible, and like organized. So he would bust out the big electronic eraser and erase the whole page and say, "Yeah, you can probably do it again better the next time."
Oh, wow.
I don't think everyone's dad had the big electronic drafting eraser, so they could quickly erase your whole homework sheet.
That sounds like you spent a lot of time at the kitchen table and you guys were working on problem solving.
Oh yeah, that's how I got better at math, I guess. And
yeah, no doubt. Obviously, yeah. Repetition is obviously the key to success in your world with math and figuring out how to design stuff. So your dad obviously guided you through becoming an engineer. And you started your career. You worked for cities, it looks like from a city or two, looking at your LinkedIn profile. Can you elaborate some of your experiences when you worked at the cities?
Yeah, I worked for Northwestern Water and Sewer District, which is a water and sewer agency. And that was a great opportunity. I was pretty young getting into that job. I had worked for a consultant for about 3 years. And it was cool to get into like a situation where it was very, very hands-on. Like you were right there. I was seated next to the director of operations. So like you heard a lot of like what went on like in the real world, sort of like the maintenance and operations aspect of a water and sewer agency. So that was great for me because, it was real life experience. It wasn't textbook or, sort of, I think sometimes consultants they're in an insulated environment because they aren't like exposed to the real world as often as someone who works sort of on a utility. And the same was true at the city. Right. It was always very open, and I'm glad a lot of the guys would come in. They would stop in and talk about problems that they were having or whatever. So you really had your thumb on the pulse of things, and I think that was a good experience for me. When I'm working with clients now, I have a sense for what their relationship with their maintenance people are. Or sometimes we'll say, hey, get your guys together. Let's bring them to the meeting instead of us guessing about what they want. Let's talk right to them.
Right.
So. I don't think all consultants have the experience of sort of the dialogue with operations. They're used to talking to engineers. Engineers sort of geek it out with sort of too much complexity, maybe.
Right. I could see how that would be very beneficial for you being in a city, working in a city, learning all the bureaucracy, let's call it, and that's what it is within those organizations and how they work and communicate. And now you're on the private sector, obviously working for, Jones and Henry now. So it brings a lot of value to them, I'm sure, because you obviously know the internal workings of the government side, as well as how it works out in the field and construction. Now, when you were in college, what did you like and learn in college when you were getting your civil engineering degree? It looks like here, and what part of things of college did you like the most?
I think for me, I really liked the problem solving, and the group work was kind of fun too. Those two things. Working with a group to try to solve problems was always pretty fun. That was probably the most fun aspect of it. I think in college they give you the tools, and you get, you sort of get acclimated to working with different people and recognizing that you sort of have to like work as a team. I thought that was probably the best part.
Nice. And back then there was a little drinking going on. You're working as a team. I don't know if you did that, but that's mostly what people did. A lot of that in college, but sure. Yeah. So going into education, right? A lot of and that's kind of where I was going with this is engineering, college, getting a piece of paper, getting your PE degree, going out into the real world, but you were at a different aspect because your dad put you out in the field, it sounds like, and you worked in the field and you had a lot of that experience. And then when kids come out of college with degrees, they don't have that experience that you had. How do you think we could improve the education system, especially when it comes to colleges, as far as, improving the difference between construction and the field versus books that, you read as an engineer?
I think the co-op program is pretty good, where people get a real life experience, like while they're in college. I think for one, it gives them an opportunity to learn about the profession, decide if it's something they want to do, but it also puts them in a real world situation. We've had a number of kids that come through and work for me. And, I sort of replicate that experience that I had with my dad, where he'd struggle for a while, but then he would say, okay, let's get back on path. So, I think that's great. I think having the real life experience, and I think, for some people, they just have the passion for it, and they'll learn what they need to know, to be the best, at this profession. So it does take a lot of sort of proactivity on the individual to learn more than just what you learn in school.
Yeah, there's no doubt. It's all about effort, right? If you want to learn and be a good engineer, getting out in the field and learning how to dig trenches, fix pipe, things like that.
And I still dig out the textbooks now and read stuff, now and try to learn even more about what there is to know. No one knows it all, and just don't stop learning. Just keep on learning more new stuff. I learn something every day. I'm pretty sure of it.
Yeah, no, that's how you grow, right? That's how we learn to grow, and we keep moving forward in life is continuously figuring out how to fix things, solve problems, that kind of stuff, which you love to do. If you could work on one big problem, like now, what would one of the biggest problems you'd say in infrastructure that we have going on right now that you would like to start working on?
I think for me, the big thing would be to try and get consultants to think beyond the easy solutions. I think a lot of times the easy solutions are the first thing you think of, but I also think those are usually the most expensive options. I think there's more options on the table if you take the time and spend the time thinking about what your answers are. I think sometimes consultants, they get behind and they run out of time, and so they just pick what's easy for them. But I think sometimes that results in a more expensive project for the owner. So I think it's a time thing. If you have more time, you can spend more time thinking of sort of the best solution for the client.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. We were talking today about, municipalities, utilities, not adapting to technologies as fast. This goes hand in hand with engineering and engineering firms. It's like we still have technology that is revolutionary, changing things now, disrupting the status quo. But, engineering firms sometimes have a hard time transitioning into technology to make them more efficient. And what do you have to say about why we don't adapt to technology right now?
I think the big thing for engineers is time. They're very focused on being, billable 100% of the time. You want to bring in as much, dollars per hour. But I think there's certainly some value in taking some time to step back and say, look, guys, here's how we're doing this. I do this with my team a lot. Maybe on Thursday, maybe at midday, we'll say, okay, we've been working all week. What are some of the issues that have come up? What are some different things that we could do? A lot of times I'll say, what are you spending a lot of time on, but it's not delivering a value to the client? You're spending a lot of time with rote work. Can we automate some of that? Can we make it easier to search through the files for things? So I think some of it is just taking a few minutes and stepping back from the work. I think it's Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He always says, if you're spending too much time cutting the tree down, you never sharpen the saw. Well, you never finish cutting the tree down because the saw is dull. So, I think for us, the big thing is to take some time, and I've always been a proponent of let's try something new. The worst thing that would happen is if it didn't work, and we're not talking about a building falling down. We're talking about just trying a new process. So, they give us an eraser for a reason.
Yeah, that's a great point. So true. It's one of those things. So you mentioned something about, time, right? Engineers, time, billable hours. And this is something that I've been trying to understand, and I'm understanding more and more, because sensor technology, different technologies that are coming out to make things more efficient, can remotely monitor our collection systems, treatment plants, things like that. It really reduces the amount of time that, an engineer would have to spend on things. Do you think that engineering firms need to adapt their businesses to change the way their business models actually work?
I think so, Chad. I think it would be good for them to give themselves some time to think about what that data means, or I've always found the jobs that I do that sometimes take a little bit longer are the better jobs, because you have time to think about it while you're driving, or a lot of inspiration may come to you when you're doing something completely unrelated to what it is you're doing, and you're like, oh, that's a good idea. I keep a notebook by my bed with a pen, so I wake up with sort of crazy ideas and I write them down. And I'm not going to lie, like 90% of those ideas you probably use because you've had some time to kind of think about it. So I think there's a lot of pressure to be billable and profitable and all that, but I think there's an aspect that maybe sometimes gets missed just because the focus is on completing work instead of maybe putting the maximum amount of effort in there.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's funny how you say that. When you're driving, you're thinking, that's what creative people do, right? It's just like, okay, well, that's what we should be working on. That's how we could fix it, or I should try it anyway and see what we can do. What's that?
Hal Newport wrote a real good book called Deep Work, and it talks about like getting into the flow of your work and like not, I hate multitasking. A lot of times I'll turn off all of my technology and close the door of my office and really just kind of sit and just work through problems, and just actually do engineering instead of answering the phone. And I mean, you can't do that all day, but I've made a conscious effort to sort of divorce myself from technology so that I have time to be an engineer, which is what I think our clients are looking for is, think about the solution,
right,
what are the ramifications of choosing things, and, try to come up with real vetted out lists of options that are like solid, options with 4 or 5, bullet points instead of just the option itself. So I think just the time.
Yeah. No. Yeah. That's a great answer. So how, with tech, going back to technology, because I think it makes a huge impact on what we're doing now in infrastructure. I've seen, it's just recently I posted something on, my procurement social channel. It was a remote heavy equipment excavator. It was like virtual reality. They're sitting there and they were running a backhoe in Arizona from Las Vegas, digging a trench. And did you see that? I'm like, man, do you think that's some stuff that we're really going to have in the future?
Why not? If there's, I think can safely be done. I mean, obviously you want to make sure that the person doing this has got 360 vision and all that safety stuff. I guess I say, why not? If something saves time and that time can be repurposed into making the product better, then I think that's what should happen. I don't think you should just say, well, we can do it faster and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It's sort of a race to the bottom, because if you're cutting out sort of the quality part of the engineering, I think you repurpose that time towards, making the solution better and sort of leveraging that data instead of just getting it done faster.
Right. Yeah. That safety is a big thing. And you were just telling me you were in a 50-foot trench today. It sounds like, let's talk about safety, because, we haven't really had any major events for safety issues that I know of in the last year or two. I know we used to have some when the guys were putting cure in place lining in, where they'd go down and, they got stuck in a manhole. That was years ago here in Chicago. But how do you make sure your team's safe at all times?
I think the big thing is just to be aware of your surroundings. You want to know what the hazards are. So even if you've been at this a while, you arrive at a job site, and really this is just life in general. You kind of just assess the dangers as you're walking around. I teach the youngsters to try to make eye contact with operators. Let the contractor you're there, because they're not looking for a white hat like poking around in the weeds. They just aren't.
Right.
So communication is probably the big things, and just being aware of your surroundings. If you're in heavy traffic, don't take a step before you look at where you're going. So just be aware of the dangers. For me, a big thing is I always try to make sure that that people are getting training and what the hazards are. We always pick on a topic every so often at work, and maybe something silly like texting and driving. But you got to be aware of that stuff, because sometimes it creeps up on you.
Yeah.
You haven't had an incident, but you've been lucky more than anything. Confined space is another one.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah, confined space, trench. I've seen a bunch of videos. I'll go back. I've seen a bunch of videos on like TikTok and stuff of trenches, guys in trenches and no safety gear at all, no shoring, things like that. Do you think construction construction companies, maybe not obviously the big ones, but being that we have labor shortages and then we have a need for more construction companies and workers, do you think we're going to see an issue where safety becomes a bigger thing down the road for us because you got inexperience, guys that are maybe have a little bit of experience in construction, trying to do things they haven't learned, trying to do things they haven't experienced. Do you think we're going to maybe walk into some of the safety issues down the road?
I hope people are aware of that there's a lot of new people in the industry and they're training, and I hope they're foreseeing that, what we may take for granted as people experienced in this, maybe if you're new, you don't. So hopefully they're, keeping their training up and kind of teaching people the safe way to do stuff so we can avoid, anything like that happening.
Right. What is your experience with the construction guys you work with now?
I think everyone is very conscious of safety. Sometimes it's surprising how much people are aware of the dangers, and I think most construction workers that I deal with are very much in tune to it, because they all want to go home at the end of the day. These projects are important, but
right.
Without the people building it, it doesn't happen.
Right. No, it's true. It's totally true. I guess what one thing I've seen is, in construction, we're not having trade schools. I think you and I talked about this before too, is trade schools, education. How are we, and engineering firms, how are we going to fix the labor issues that we're having now? What do you think?
I guess I don't have a good answer. I'm hopeful that some of the technology helps to fill some of the gaps so that the engineers can really focus on engineering, and that's my hope. I think we've done a lot of things where we've improved our processes, so we're a lot more efficient with the rote part of these tasks, so that we can still keep up with the amount of actual work that we're doing. So instead of trying to automate things that are not necessarily like engineering, like preparation of a document or something, so that you can push a button and it's populated with all the fields and stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm hopeful.
Do you think?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. There was a little delay there. My bad. Go ahead with your comment. What were you going to say?
I don't recall what I was going to say. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So I was going to say, okay, well, we all know there's a labor shortage, and, there's an education thing. And then obviously, more construction companies are going to come up through and develop over time. I would hope, because we're going to need them, especially because the infrastructure gap is $2.59 trillion. Now, you've probably done some research on this stuff. Do you think estimating infrastructure is the right thing we should be doing, or should we actually start grabbing some real data intelligence?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think I'm probably too involved with the day-to-day of designing and building projects to really know the big picture. Maybe I'm too much of an aim.
I was just curious because ACE, or not ACE, but American Society of Civil Engineering, they post the annual, or every 4 years, they post the infrastructure assessment of America, right? And we were at C-. I think we were a D something back in 2020, I believe, something like that. No, maybe even before that. So anyway, my point is, we have a big infrastructure gap. It's getting bigger. We aren't getting enough tax-based money to help fix more infrastructure. The federal government's kicking in, obviously, with their infrastructure funds. Where do you think we could be utilizing the funds, better? Is there a way that we could maybe use it more strategically? I'm trying to figure that out myself.
Yeah, I think kind of as I alluded to before is maybe just take some time and look at those big, gigantic projects. I'm working on one right now where they were going to build a very large pump station in a storage basin because they had sewers leaking upstream, and we decided to have them take a look at their sewers upstream and said, why don't we go try to fix the problem at the source instead of build, more treatment or more pumping or more storage. And we found a significant amount of sewers that are going to need work. And, those $5 million are going to be far better spent fixing the problem, the source and the root of the problem, instead of maybe going for the easy solution, which was to build, more more infrastructure to try to handle the problem. I
Yeah.
always use the analogy of when I'm talking to a client, I'm like, if you had a leaky roof, you wouldn't go get more buckets. You would go up and fix the roof, and then it's done. It's fixed, and it's fixed seemingly for the future. So, I think that's part of it is sometimes consultants have to have difficult discussions with clients who may have gotten partways down the road. In this case, another consultant had sort of pushed this client towards this solution, and it was a little tricky to say, hey, you paid these guys for this other option, but I don't think I would recommend that you go that route yet. Well, we may end up there, but I think, and we have seen this before on projects that I've been involved with, and I did one very, very similar, where we did the sewer rehab work, and we were able to downsize the infrastructure because we fixed the problem. We still needed to build the pump station,
Nice.
but it was by no means as large as it would have had been if we wouldn't have fixed those things first. So it'll kind of take a little bit of a systematic approach towards solving things.
That's an interesting kind of a topic. Kind of going back to what we talked about just previously was the billable hours, and then now you just kind of mentioned it, collection systems. If we started back into the collection system further, maybe in the sub basins, the 8-inch pipes, start figuring out where all the problems are there, fixing that before we start upgrading, spending hundreds of millions of dollars upgrading treatment plants. Because even if you upgrade the treatment plant, you still got the elephant in the room, which is the collection system sitting there, aging, tons of I&I getting into it, roots, grease piling up in there. And then, you upgrade your plant, that's great, but you still have the same problems. That's kind of the way I look at it. Unless it's a treatment thing where treatment, you're not meeting your requirements, EPA requirements, right? Doing treatment, that's different. But if it's like capacity issues, why aren't we focusing on collection systems more? Just like you just said.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great point, Chad. I think the collection system just gets forgotten because it's a lot of work. It's very tedious work. It's watching lots and lots of videos and figuring out what the problems are. That's something that that I'm working on with a couple of engineers. We're working on a way to sort of automate and speed up that process so that we can spend our time looking at the defects, and not looking at good pipe. We want to look at defects. We want to find them. And then we want to come up with solutions for that. So our goal is to try to maximize how much footage of pipe we can get through and, deliver that value to the client. So like I said, we're spending our time looking at the defects and coming up with solutions. So yeah, I think the collection systems are a great place to start. Yeah.
Yeah, no, technology I think is getting us there where we can use AI, for example, to use NASCO scoring to give us condition assessment ratings, right, on the sewer pipes and manholes. So we know how bad they are. And that's one of the big things I was a proponent to when I had the last RMS utility services. When we were doing that, building out that system, it was like, that's triage, this collection system. Let's figure out where the problems are. Then we can use the capital funds. And instead of guessing where to put these funds to work, why aren't we just, here's the problem, here's the places we need to put the money, and let's get it done, that kind of thing. I just don't think we were at that point in 2017 where we didn't have the data to really make those decisions. And a lot of the engineering work for the collection system was just guessed on history, right? It's a old clay pipe, bunch of roots in it, and we should just fix it right away, right? It's just line it. And there could have been a bigger smoking gun out there that was a collapsed sewer that they didn't even know about, because we didn't have enough information.
Yeah, we worked on a project where it was probably a 40,000 foot project. It was pretty good, like a village. And the discussion was always like, well, what should we do here? And they tried a handful of they lined this street or that street. Well, nothing solved anything. Well, it was not holistic. So we said, we think you should TV the whole system. TV everything. For a couple bucks a foot, you get a TV of everything. You get a snapshot of everything at the same time, and now you know where your defects were. And there was a plan to line all those sewers, but we actually stepped back from that and did a lot of other smaller repairs. And now they no longer bypass in that system. And I'm very proud of what we did, because what we did for maybe a quarter of the cost construction-wise, was just as effective as lining every single sewer in that system. So, you really pay the price, but there was a lot of value in what we were able to do there.
Yeah, they say that 20% of the collection system is the problem. And finding that 20% is the difficult part.
It's the 80-20 rule.
Yeah,
right?
finding the 20%. 80-20. You got it. Exactly. Yeah, that's it right there. And that's one thing we wanted to use those defect codes as a way to quickly prioritize where to fix the pipes and the manholes and then solve the city's problems versus, chasing it down to the treatment plant and, trying to upgrade that for God knows how much millions of dollars that would cost. Right. So, last kind of follow-up questions to this. Do you think there's good engineering firms and bad engineering firms? Are there bad engineering firms out there? Trick question. It's a hot seat. I'm sorry. I have to ask it.
Maybe there are firms that could improve the way they do some things. Maybe they are good firms. They're just good firms, and they haven't figured out how to be good firms yet. I think everybody is well-intentioned in this business. I really do. And I think hopefully some of the things that maybe I said here would help out a firm that might be struggling, because I think a rising tide lifts all ships. We're all in this together.
True.
Certainly not. It's not as competitive as an environment as everyone might like to think. We want everyone to succeed, because I think at the end of the day, the taxpayers or the ratepayers are paying for all of what we're doing. So if one firm does badly and a lot of money gets spent on a bad project, well then, we don't get to work. So I think that's the hope here.
It's true. It gives everyone, yeah.
That's why I share a lot of what I do.
Yeah, I can get
that, like I say, let's help everyone.
Yeah, no, you put out awesome content. I've seen your YouTube channels and your the blogs that you write are great. I didn't get to get it through them all, but I've glanced over a couple of different ones, and I was like, wow, he's on it. He knows what he's doing. That's for sure. So. I guess we'll get towards the end of here in the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, can you just tell the audience where they can get a hold of you and what your YouTube channel is and things like that, Ted?
Sure. You can look me up on YouTube. The Aquifer is my YouTube channel, and I've been thinking of some new content to put up there. I do blog a lot. You'll find the links to the blogs in my LinkedIn profile. I write about a lot of things. Some of them aren't even engineering related. So come and enjoy something about pretty much anything.
That's awesome, Ted. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think we could probably talk for another 30 minutes or so, but we'll save that for the next time. And thank you so much, and have a great Thanksgiving, because we're close to next week for that.
Thank you,
man. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Infrastructure Hot Seat podcast. We hope that this show brought you some insight on relevant topics within the infrastructure world. Please join us every 2 weeks on Tuesday for the next episode. If you're interested in being a guest on this podcast, please set up a 15-minute interview with your host at calendly.com/Chad Smeltzer.